When you first visit Amsterdam's famous coffee shops, that's what all the marijuana shops here are called, the thing you notice is how normal it all seems. It's not unlike a quiet cafe or Starbucks in the U.S. People, mostly foreign tourists, sitting around sipping coffee, all the while openly smoking the marijuana they bought right there in the shop. What could easily get you arrested in most American cities, here, it's just fine.
And of course, Americans, they love potent weed.
Michael Velling owns and runs 2 coffee shops in Amsterdam. He was one of the original entrepreneurs back in the 1970s when the Netherlands first began allowing the sale of cannabis.
And this has been going on for more than 40 years now. And nobody gives a real. It hasn't brought this country down. I mean, what's the fuss all about?
So you might think that buying, selling, smoking, and growing small amounts of marijuana is perfectly legal. Well, it's not. Tolerance is the key word here. The government tolerates all these activities, and you won't be arrested or fined or hassled. The government licenses coffee shops to sell marijuana as long as they follow a strict set of rules. No one under 18 is allowed to buy or even step foot in the door. There's no advertising. That's partly why they're called coffee shops and not cannabis shops. No alcohol or hard drugs are allowed. Customers can buy a maximum of 5 grams of marijuana at a time. That's about a half a cup. You can take it home or smoke it in the cafe. This is one thing you won't see in Colorado or Washington. There'll be no on-site smoking. So, if the United States is heading down this road of allowing recreational use of marijuana, what's the potential harm?
In the Netherlands, you could see this. People using cannabis are using less alcohol.
Frans Troutman is a lead researcher at the Trimbos Institute, the Netherlands' top government-run research group on mental health and addiction. For years, he's been evaluating the effects of different national drug policies.
What about the larger argument that many people in the U.S. feel that when the government does step forward and say, we're going to allow the sale of cannabis for recreational use, that is a terrible message to young people?
Well, it is let's say it's a less terrible message than to say we keep alcohol legal and we keep tobacco legal. Because alcohol and tobacco, they really cause, in the long run, irreversible health damage. It can be brain damage, liver damage, lung damage. With cannabis, we don't have overdoses, we don't have liver cirrhosis, we don't have lung cancer. We have a drug which is relatively harmless.
Scientists with the National Institute for Drug Abuse in the U.S. point out that marijuana can be damaging. They estimate that 9% of people who use it will become addicted to it. And its harms can be especially acute for kids, pregnant women, and those with the potential for mental illness. But in the Netherlands, at least, 2 of the other big public health fears about loosening marijuana laws haven't come to pass. First, according to European Union data, 40 years of coffee shops haven't coincided with a rise in the use of hard drugs like cocaine or heroin. This is the fear of what's called the gateway effect, where critics argue marijuana users are more likely to move on to harder drugs. Second, according to the UN, among others, Dutch policy hasn't turned the Dutch into a nation of potheads either. Only about 6% of people in the Netherlands report using marijuana, compared with about 9% in France, 11% in Spain, and about 15% in the U.S.
In the Netherlands, if it comes to prevalence of cannabis use in the population, we are not the highest. France is much higher. Spain is much higher.
Places that have no coffee shops.
And which are fully repressive also on the user. I mean, Spain is changing now, but France has been always very repressive. So you have there higher prevalences than here. So making it easily accessible doesn't mean that you get an enormously high prevalence.
Of course, it's not clear if Americans' drug use will match the Netherlands. The 2 countries are different in so many ways, in size, in culture, in demographics. And there are aspects of Dutch policy that are causing significant problems. And those problems have prompted a vigorous debate among citizens and politicians alike in the Netherlands about how their coffee shop system should evolve. Here's one example. Even though you're allowed to walk into a coffee shop and buy pot, no one is allowed to grow large amounts or sell pot to those coffee shops. Just listen to coffee shop owner Michael Velling describe this.
I see over here you have a menu that people can come and make a selection from a variety of different choices of things that you sell. Where do you get that from?
I don't know. That is the great mystery of the Dutch system.
So you just wake up in the morning and there's a little delivery that magically appears?
Magically, for certain. But officially and also unofficially, I do not have suppliers.
The Dutch say they always intended to address this bizarre gap in the law, which exists because when the coffee shops were first introduced back in the 1970s, there was such widespread criticism from America and from Europe that the Dutch say they were pressured to not go further and regulate the supply chain as well. So the person who magically delivers your supply to your shop, he's breaking the law.
Oh, definitely. If he's arrested, he'll go to jail.
I started as a grower.
Velling put us in touch with his supplier, who agreed to talk as long as we didn't reveal his identity or even use his real voice. He told us he imports some of his marijuana from abroad, but much of it, he says, is grown domestically in the Netherlands by a network of home growers, housewives, lawyers, and the like. Do you ever worry that even though this is considered a fairly tolerant society, that you might be prosecuted for what you do?
That's a possibility. Yes, every day.
Every day. Doesn't that get stressful after a while?
No, you get used to it.
This decision not to regulate the supply chain causes several problems. Not only do the Dutch lose their chance to tax that side of the business, but more importantly, it's allowed an illegal export market to flourish. A senior police official estimated that 80% of the pot grown in the Netherlands gets sent abroad and ends up on the black market. Another Dutch official said, quote, "We now function as a supplier of drugs for the rest of Europe. We never intended to become one of the major exporters of cannabis to the world." Officials in 10 major Dutch cities have appealed to the government to finally fix this gap in the law, but nothing has happened. Back in the U.S., Colorado and Washington are regulating their entire pot market, how it's grown, processed, sold, and taxed. Their rules were designed to protect consumers and to ensure that none of that legal pot ends up on the illegal market. Of course, the irony here is that the U.S., which used to criticize Dutch policy, now has 2 states implementing more comprehensive policies than the Dutch ever have. Back in the Netherlands, the Dutch have continued to refine their policy. They've stepped up enforcement of coffee shops. Back in the late 90s, there was a concern about too much leniency towards them, so stricter rules were written and violators were closed down. No new licenses have been issued in almost 20 years. The Dutch are also tackling the rising potency of pot, something both Colorado and Washington want to do as well. Dutch scientists regularly test coffee shop marijuana, and anything over a certain level is considered a hard drug and forbidden for sale. The Dutch have also had a big national debate about whether drug tourism needs to be reined in. In the small city of Maastricht, which sits on the Netherlands' southern border with Belgium and Germany, city officials saw an alarming number of foreign visitors crossing into their town with just one destination in mind. Onno Hoes is the mayor of Maastricht.
In the past, we had more than 2 million foreign visitors of the coffee shops. And you can say, of course, that's good for the economy, because when they're here, they spend also money to other things. But the knowledge is they don't go to other shops, they don't go to hotels or restaurants, they just enter the country, buy it, smoke it in the shop, in the car, go back to the shop for a second part, and then go back home.
For a city of just 120,000 residents, and one whose streets were laid out back in the Middle Ages, 2 million visitors snarled traffic and caused a headache for local residents. Other border town mayors voiced similar complaints, and so 2 years ago, new national rules went into effect, banning anyone who's not a legal Dutch resident from buying in the coffee shops. No more tourists allowed. The new rules exposed some sharp divisions in the country. Amsterdam, along with other big northern cities, said it would never comply with the ban on foreigners. It can handle crowds better, plus tourists bring in hundreds of millions in revenue. But Maastricht and other mostly southern border towns welcomed the ban and did comply. Subsequently, 6 of Maastricht's 14 coffee shops closed down, some for breaking the rules and selling to tourists. Several said they just didn't have enough customers anymore. By all accounts, the streets are much quieter now, but there was a downside. Street drug sales spiked.
I'm very satisfied with the fact that the foreign people are not welcome anymore in Maastricht. So we need a certain period, of course, to get a new balance. And again, it's much safer, much healthier in the city of Maastricht now. And there's much more place for the city to develop in an economic way.
For his part, Amsterdam coffee shop owner Michael Velling hopes that the U.S. doesn't continue its rapid path towards legalization. He's worried that might encourage other countries, including his, to follow suit. Velling says the Netherlands' odd quasi-legal patchwork system serves to keep the price of pot high and the number of competing coffee shops low, which this one businessman does not want to see changed.
I'm fearing American policymakers because when cannabis is legalized in this country, I lose my business.
Why is that?
Well, because it's a legal product. So the margins and everything will change.
If everyone can sell it, prices are going to go down, your profits go down.
Of course.
Economics.
Simple economics.